Bombardier is a global transportation company with over 60,000 employees worldwide that designs, manufactures, sells, and supports transportation products within the aerospace and rail transportation industries. During our interviews, we focused our attention on the rail transportation industry at Bombardier's Pittsburgh campus. By interviewing and observing employees from all levels of the rail control solutions and systems departments, we were able to get a clear understanding of Bombardier's organizational structure and coordination processes for its large-scale projects. Bombardier has a matrix organizational structure. This means that for each project, engineers are assigned from functional engineering groups to concentrate on one aspect of the project. These engineers typically work on multiple projects at a time.
We have like a matrix, so we have a vertical structure of functional managers. Like Rick is you're still under John, right? Or you're under Bill? Okay. So we have different functional managers. That's what normally people think of as your boss. Right. He's your functional manager. My functional manager is a gentleman named Anil. But at the same time, I have these functional managers who are responsible for seeing how I allocate my time, and that can be said for any employee here, and what project they allocate their time to. But at the same time, you have in a horizontal structure, I'm assigned to Phoenix as an example here. I'm also assigned to probably 7 or 8 other projects concurrently right now. So I have to deal with the project management for every one of those projects. And they always have their, I don't want to say their say, but their way of their say how things need to be done or what needs to be prioritized according to the schedule of that project. So you have this.
For example, Rich is an engineer at Bombardier. He is currently on 3 projects and therefore reports to 3 different project managers. At the same time, he also reports to a functional engineering manager that is separate from each of his projects. This is what makes up a matrix organizational structure because at any given time there are 2 levels of management, functional and project. The matrix structure is more cost and time efficient for Bombardier because engineers are utilized on multiple projects at a time. This makes it easier for Bombardier to take on more complex projects and complete them in a timely manner. Bombardier's engineers also benefit from this structure in that they have more opportunities to learn and work on multiple projects at a time, something that wouldn't be possible in a traditional project-based organization. One problem with the matrix structure is that it tends to promote coordination neglect throughout the projects. Coordination neglect occurs when people within an organization fail to understand that coordination is important and fail to take steps to minimize the difficulty of coordination. The 2 main aspects of coordination neglect are partition focus and component focus. Partition focus is when people focus more on a task division than on task integration. Component focus is when people focus more on the individual parts of the overall task. During our interviews and observations, we saw evidence of both partition focus and component focus. Additionally, we were able to identify a number of steps that Bombardier's managers take throughout each project to prevent these coordination problems. We saw that partition focus mainly occurs at the project manager level during the early stages of a project. At this time, project managers are responsible for dividing the project into smaller parts, assigning the parts to specific functional engineering areas, and identifying the individual engineers responsible for each part. During this initial process, they are focusing on task division within the project more than task integration.
It's a pretty standard process. Essentially, the first thing you do, this is from an engineering standpoint. From an engineering standpoint, you need to develop your staff first. For all of our projects, they're different from customer to customer, but essentially they're all the same. We supply turnkey transit systems to various customers, and they're primarily a rubber tire system using the same control systems that we've used in the past 10 years now. So they're pretty much standardized. So the first thing you do is you develop your engineering team, first step. The second step, requirements. That's probably our biggest thing. Make sure we have a handle on our requirements. And essentially we have 2 levels of requirements. We have the customer contract, and we have our own internal derived requirements. The customer contract, it's pretty cut and dry. So for Phoenix, here's the technical contract. Here's the technical provisions and special provisions. So these are the technical requirements that we are obligated to meet for the project. In addition to these, we have internal requirements that are derived from our systems. Requirements that aren't necessarily spelled out in these documents, but from our own system studies, we derive ourselves and we pass throughout our engineering groups. So from my standpoint, it's imperative that we have all the requirements broken down and allocated to the functional groups. So if I go through all these and all my system-derived requirements, I can say, okay, all these requirements, you vehicle guy, you have to fulfill these requirements. You ATC guy, you have to fill all these requirements, and down the line. We have, we essentially have a requirements review, or a system architecture review, where we identify requirements in the contract specification and we map them against our product, and we make sure that everything fits together. And in that architecture, we identify the interfaces between the various groups. So as a group, as a team, we know that, okay, you vehicle have to interface with the train control to meet these requirements. Sorry. So in this meeting, and usually it depends on the project. Sometimes it's an hour-long meeting. Sometimes it's days and days and days to go through this. So for Phoenix, we had a day-long meeting, and then we had probably another half-day follow-up meeting.
During the design phase of a project, the project engineering director is responsible for leading a system architecture review with all the functional engineering managers. They review the designs from each department and check that the designs will actually work together when connected as an entire system. Therefore, the managers have a process in place to plan out how the system integration will occur.
So that's a really, really important stepping stone, and that usually happens very early in the project. So the system requirements and the system architecture, that's a key step, especially in terms of us working together, because once once one engineer knows the requirements that he has to fulfill as well as the requirements that other guys have to fulfill, then you know what you have to do to help this guy out and what this guy has to do to help this guy out, and all the way down the line.
Within Bombardier's matrix structure, component focus mainly occurs at the engineer level of the projects. Since the engineers are assigned to work on one specific aspect of a project, it is easy for them to focus on completing that part rather than how their work integrates with and fits into the project as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, conflicts always arise. No matter what you get into or what kind of project. I mean, it can be a tough project, it can be a small project. It doesn't matter. Conflicts always come up. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times the conflict arises because someone wants to they're looking at their scope of work and they want to ease the effort that they have to do for themselves. And it's great if you can save yourself a nickel, but if you're going to save yourself a nickel by costing your colleague or a sub-supplier or somebody else a dime, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But you might be just thinking about saving that 5 cents for yourself. When conflicts come up within engineering and where I have to resolve, where I'm the sole person responsible for resolving that conflict, I mean, it's important to make sure that the different parties involved in the conflict truly understand the end goal. I mean, it's we're all on the same team trying to accomplish the same task. To implement a system on time, meeting all the requirements, on schedule, meeting the budget, all that kind of stuff. So sometimes people can lose sight of that when they're just focused on their particular area. So you need to take the people where there is conflict and just pull them back for a second and have them, remind them of the big picture. That's a really good first step to do. Because sometimes, like I said, we're a matrix organization, so we have guys who just do a particular task and that's all they do. And when they're done doing it for Phoenix, they're going to do the same thing on another project, or they might be doing the same task at the same time for various projects. So that's truly all that they see. So sometimes you really need to step back and explain to them.
Although the matrix structure may promote elements of coordination neglect throughout Bombardier's projects, we found that the project managers recognize this and take steps to prevent and/or alleviate coordination problems. Since any given project not only has a project manager, but also has multiple project directors and a high-level deputy project manager, there are many people in place to check on the engineer's progress and integrate each part of the project back together.
We have one of our functional areas is system integration. So we have a group of engineers that do nothing but integrate the systems. And them with the project engineer work together to make sure that the various groups, the vehicle, control, power, all work together, right?
The Project managers also explain that they mitigate the risk of coordination neglect by creating comprehensive project schedules and in keeping close communication with all members of the project. This communication takes the form in weekly status meetings with functional managers as well as informal communication with engineers in the Pittsburgh office.
The first is probably the most basic. You have a schedule. You create a good schedule. You try not to make a schedule too complicated, but you can't follow. But you try not to make it so complicated that someone from the street looks at it, they should be able to understand it.
Right.
The other big one is you have to make sure that you meet with your team members. You need to know what's going on. Every Thursday at 9 a.m. I have a meeting for the Phoenix project. I meet with my core guys and we report back. It's not a detailed meeting. It's not a you're not sitting in there going over all the details and all little design flaws or anything like that. It's strictly what's your status, this is what the actions were from last week. Okay, I know this person might raise an issue, then we figure out how we're going to address it. You have to kind of coordinate this. Then, on top of that, we have what we call a monthly organizational review, an MOR. The MOR is so, like, for example, I report to Mark on the dotted line. However, my boss is Bill Cooper. Bill Cooper is the person that I have to report. Thanks, bro. Bill Cooper is in charge of all the project engineering managers and the project engineers for RCS. So I have to report to him what the status of the project is. I need to know, he needs to know from me, are we over budget on hours? Where are we at on the schedule? Where are the engineering issues? So by those three checks, those are the three high level parts of keeping it all together. But there are no real processes to be diligent.
Right.
You have to be diligent.
Right.
You have to know what's going on. You get up and you go talk to someone.
Right.
If you're not sure on something, don't sit there and try and spend too much time if you don't have to. When you have a lead engineer, an expert on something, you can go over and say, hey, how's this going from last week? Where are you at? You don't need to wait to that meeting. But you have those three core things you want to do. But just be diligent.
Bombardier's matrix structure may have some downsides, but since each project manager acknowledges the coordination risks and works to prevent them at each stage of the project, the downsides are overshadowed by the advantages that the structure creates.
I'm surrounded by the sound of loud machines.